Hello, hello, everybody. Let's make our way. Grab your drinks. Let's make our way to a seat. Find any open seat. We're about to get started. Much awaited topic for tonight. Please come on in. Come on in. Make our way to the seat. All right. Usually people stay at the bar to keep talking, when we start. So y'all are ready to go. All right. All right. Good evening and welcome to our February meeting. I'm Winslow Jones, your AYR president. I'm honored to serve all of you and with our incredible executive board as we continue to plan our organization's events as we head closer into this election season. We are a millennial and Gen Z focused group. Our mission is to help Republicans get elected, also bring like-minded fiscal conservatives together, plan fun socials, hold monthly meetings with highly qualified guest speakers, engage in intriguing political discussions, and make politics fun. We have a hot topic tonight that hits home for many people. Before we introduce our speakers, I'd like to do a few quick announcements. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about membership. Our membership vice president is unable to be here tonight. She is having fun drinking margaritas in Mexico right now. So I will do the spiel for membership. I know it very well. I served as membership VP for 3 years before becoming president. So I do see a few new faces tonight. I believe we had one person sign up for membership, so I'm very happy about chartered. Our active members have to be 18 to 40. It's 65 for our premium membership. If you sign up at any point from 18 to 40, that lasts until you are 41. Once you turn 41, you age out, it's expired, but it does last. That $65 will last you until you're 41. So literally, if you sign up for our premium membership, your membership basically pays for itself if you come to basically two of our paid events, because you get a huge discount. So then we also offer an annual membership for $40. Expires the year from which you purchased that annual membership, and you have to renew it the next year. So it's, in my opinion, so much worth just paying the $65 for premium, and you don't have to renew the next year. Also, premium members only, the $65 fee, will get you a name badge, an AYR name badge, and that's honestly one of the big reasons people sign up, because they want to look cool, like they're official part of the club. Also, discounts to our ticketed events. We will have at least 3 ticketed events this year. The big one being our Christmas party at the very end of the year. Members get a huge discount, literally 50% off, so it's well worth it. And drink tickets sometimes for selected happy hours. We'll offer drink tickets for members only. And opportunities, if you're a member, opportunities to vote and serve on our executive board. So we do hold elections every November to re-elect a new board. And here a few benefits of serving on the board is that it is a stepping stone for serving in future political or public offices. Media opportunities for media interviews and to represent Georgia at national conventions. First in line to attend Republican events, dinners, meet and greets, etc. And yeah, it's just fun. And when you sign up for membership, you're also supporting our club and what we do. And like I said, our mission is to bring young, like-minded fiscal conservatives together and help Republicans win elections. We will have some get out the vote events this year, it being an election year. So please sign up. And if you would like to sign up for membership, since our vice president of membership is not here tonight, just go to our website at www.atlantayoungrepublicans.com and you can sign up for membership there. A few events that I would like to speak on tonight. Our vice president of events, she is going to come late tonight for a work commitment, so I'll go ahead and speak for her. Our next event is at Limerick Junction Pub on March 7th. So that's Thursday, March 7th. It's not the second Thursday. We're doing it the first Thursday of March because we're having 2 other events in March. It's going to be a St. Patrick's Day theme, so wear your green. March 7th, Limerick Junction Pub, 7 p.m. And then I was also I'm going to read, sorry, it's on my phone because our women's chair, she's a teacher, and she is planning our women's events this year where it's her organization, ACT, is partnering with us. Her name is Megan Smith. She was going to be here tonight, but she's a teacher, and a student backed into her car literally 30 minutes before she was going to come here tonight. So she's dealing with that. So she sent me a text of what she wanted me to say. Where's my face? Face, thank you. So she said, so our next women's event is going to be Tuesday, March 19th. It's going to be hosted by ACT Atlanta and AYR. And it'll be in the evening. It will be a mixer for women only, celebrating powerful women in the political world. Drink demonstration and appetizers. Address is in Brookhaven, but will be sent once you RSVP. So sign up with your email, members only. So AYR members only, women are permitted to come. So if you're a member, we should already have your email in our system. So in the next couple weeks, you will be receiving an email if you are a woman to attend our women's event on March 19th. And then our next monthly meeting will be March 28th. And the information about our speakers will come out once we confirm our speakers. Okay, so moving on. That was events. So before we bring on our speakers, per our bylaws in AYR, the president can appoint an executive vice president to help with all the operational duties of the club. So much happens behind the scenes to make our events happen. So tonight, I have the distinct honor of introducing this particularly special guy who I met at an AYR outing in Piedmont Park in 2020. We have practically been joined at the hip for the past 2 years, oh my gosh, 4 years. Can't do my math tonight. He is the mastermind behind running this club, an encyclopedia of Georgia and U.S. history and politics, and the executor of many of the behind-the-scenes duties of our club, and just happens to be my best friend. He did an amazing job as treasurer and helped us switch from a woke bank to a non-woke bank last year. I actually typed that in wrong. I was very tired last night. I can honestly say I may not be on this stage had he not been my biggest supporter to run for president. He believed in me, and he pours so much more into helping others without expecting to be recognized. He connected us with our speakers for tonight, and this topic is something very near and dear to his heart. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage and extend the opportunity to introduce our speakers for tonight, your new Executive Vice President of Atlanta Young Republicans, Skylar Akins.
I'm almost going to cry, Winslow. That was so sweet. Thank you. It's an honor to continue to serve this club. And as she said, this is something that is near to dear to my heart. And as you guys know, coalition building is really important to our success within the conservative movement and within the Republican Party. And I would not be here today if it were not for recognizing not only the work that Winslow and the board has done, some of them are at the front throughout, but also coalition building with my friends here from the Log Cabin Republicans. We're doing important work down at the Capitol. They're sitting right there together, so let's hopefully give them a round of applause for being here and supporting us and teaming up with us. I'm proud to be on the board this year, doing policy work on a couple of bills that we're working on to protect children on this very issue. Senate Bill 88, and we're going to eventually start working on the Women's Sports Protection Act that's moving through. The second group, obviously, that we partner with is Gays Against Groomers. So just wanted to give both of them a shout out. They're our co-sponsors for tonight. So if you're interested in signing up for them, there's no harm done. This is coalition building. You can belong to multiple groups. Obviously, AYR is one closest to my heart because my best friend is the president. I served here many years. It's Log Cabin is, because I'm a gay conservative, my home too. So make sure if you are interested in joining, you see them and talk to them. They're a great group of guys right there. So I have the pleasure of introducing these two people because I've grown to know them over the past few months. One of them I've known for many, many years when I was a Democrat. And yes, I used to be a Democrat. My first Republican I voted for was Brian Kemp for governor. So if you don't know, I have a walk away story. That's why I'm here. So this person walked away with me around a little bit later than I did, but walked away with me. And then the other one being Jeff, and then Ellie. I'm going to read their bios to give you a little bit about who they are and welcome them to the stage. And as soon as I finish reading the bios, if you would just give them a warm welcome. The first one is Ellie Riddell, who is the Georgia chapter leader for what we call Gays Against Groomers. If you're on social media, you've probably seen them. They are a group that fights grooming of children by things like drag queen, story hour, that kind of thing. So our first speaker tonight is Ellie Riddell. She graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Science from Niagara Falls University. Her educational focus was on media production, theater, and philosophy. She's a film nerd, she'll tell you that. Her educational focus again, was on media. She's been speaking publicly about the protection of children online now for 3 years. She recently moved into political activism and works as the Georgia chapter leader of the 501c4 nonprofit Gays Against Groomers, which works to combat the indoctrination of children into radical gender ideology and expose the dangers this ideology poses to America's children and the very fabric of the United States. The Gays Against Groomers website specifically states as their mission, it's very simple. We are an organization of gays and others in the community who oppose the sexualization, indoctrination, and medicalization of children under the guise of the ever-expanding term LGBTQIA+, and as some like to say, divided sign, minus sign, MNOP. So if you are interested in more information, you go to gaysagainstgroomers.com, and there's a link up at the top that's chapters, and then go down to Georgia, and that's where you'll be able to follow Ellie's work closely that she does here as the Georgia coordinator. So if you would please give a warm Atlanta welcome to Ellie Riddell of Gays Against Groomers. She comes to the stage. So the next person is the one that I was mentioning walked away with me and is a very dear friend of mine, someone that has personally just mentored me through times in my life, through ups and downs as a friend, and has really been found his voice in this movement, fighting transgender and gender ideology all throughout the country. He's got a little bit of a lengthy bio, but I'm going to go through it fast. He's an accomplished attorney, so I'm going to read you his bio, and I feel very honored to welcome him, because to know Jeff is a privilege, and him and his husband are happily married and have a beautiful home down in Butts County, Georgia. So, it's particularly an honor for me to welcome him here tonight. Attorney Jeff Cleghorn was a vocal gay rights advocate from 1997 through 2003, appearing frequently on national TV news, from CNN to Fox. So he went from the right to the left on his media tours. He represented the Service Members Legal Defense Network in Washington, D.C. as a staff attorney in this role. In this role, Jeff represented hundreds of military personnel in matters relating to the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law and the Department of Defense's treatment of its gay and lesbian personnel. His work and advocacy continued in the 2010s. Jeff has unexpectedly come out of retirement, which, as I said, is very comfortable, with the bold statement proclaiming, "I'm returning to duty, and I encourage others," meaning those of you in the audience, to address this crisis being caused by people using our names, explains Jeff. First and foremost, we must address the threat of gender ideology targeting and harming our children. Also, like others, Jeff has a deep concern about the growing threat of gender ideology and its impact upon LGBT American rights, so lesbian, gay, and bisexual rights, as well as women's rights, and also safeguarding children. Mr. Cleghorn is an Army veteran that served our country honorably as an officer in the Army's Military Intelligence Corps and also in the Defense Intelligence Agency at the Pentagon on the Joint Staff Directorate for Intelligence. Again, please give a warm AYR welcome to my friend, Jeff Cleghorn.
All right. Hi there. Tied. Hi. Thank you. All right. Take a seat, Jeff, if you like. Get comfortable. We're going to start first things first. All right. So tell us a brief history and mission of Gays Against Groomers and the Log Cabin Republicans. We'll start with Ellie for GAG.
Hello, I'm chapter leader of Georgia, and Gays Against Groomers is, our mission is to fight against the medicalization, sexualization, and indoctrination of children under the guise of LGBTQIA+. It's a movement that's been taken over by radical activists, and we don't want they're taking it over in our name, LGBT acceptance has gone down recently because of these activists trying to target children, and this is something we never mind, because she was seeing things that were very inappropriate, kids that drag indoctrination in schools with inappropriate and that our education system was being taken over. So how Gays Against Groomers started.
It was founded in the 70s in California around the time that a voter initiative was put on the Ronald Reagan was governor of California at the time, and he opposed that effort. It's called the Briggs Amendment. The Briggs Amendment failed, and so the Log Cabin Republicans were formed in a chapter-based political organization for gay and lesbian and bisexual conservative Republicans and libertarians. And I don't know how many chapters. How many chapters does Log Cabin have right now? Anybody know how many state chapters they have? But the Georgia chapter has been around a good while and is thriving due to the leadership of several of y'all in the audience today. And I'm proud to be a member of both the Georgia Log Cabin Republicans as well as the Georgia chapter of Gays Against Groomers.
What are the roots and history of the general movement of the LGBTQIA plus community, and how has that shaped our world today, given many may not know the significance behind when or how it started?
Well, in the beginning, let's start in 1962. That was when I was born. So about that time, gays, homosexuals in America and much of the Western world were invisible. You didn't hear us, you didn't see us. There wasn't much going on about us, except when something went wrong, someone got in trouble for something. And it was a scandal, and people would whisper, and, it's just a dirty, icky little thing that people didn't talk about in public. And over time, gay men and lesbian women all across the United States and elsewhere in the Western world organized to try to give voice to our lives, to say that, well, we're here, we exist, we're your neighbors, family, friends, brothers, sisters, and we just want to live our lives with dignity and without worry of being persecuted or prosecuted. And back in the day, in the 50s and 60s, by way of example, there was a period where you could not be gay and work in the federal government. You could not be gay and be in the military. You could not get a security clearance. You couldn't be a school teacher. You couldn't get married. You couldn't adopt. There were sodomy laws in some large number of states that put people in jail for adult consensual private behavior. Um, Police raided bars and other places where gay people assembled just for harassment. That was part of the culture. So there was work to be done to bring face and give voice to this population of people, ever how many of us there are, and to try to remove the ick factor. And so that effort began, and over a long period of decades, through the work of a lot of people in a lot of different places in a lot of different ways, we changed hearts and minds and accomplished everything on the gay rights drop-down menu. The sodomy laws are now gone. Marriage equality is the law of the land, same-sex marriage, serve in the military, etc. And this success has accomplished largely because of the effort of conservative, heterosexual, white Christian men. Two in particular, Justice Kennedy on the United States Supreme Court, who was appointed by Reagan. Justice Kennedy wrote the first four Supreme Court decisions, pro-gay Supreme Court decisions. A conservative, Republican, Christian man. He wrote the decision that got rid of the sodomy laws. He wrote the decision that got rid of the Defense of Marriage Act. He wrote the decision that allowed same-sex marriage, the Obergefell decision in 2015. And then a second conservative, Republican, white, heterosexual man wrote the most recent pro-gay Supreme Court decision in the Bostock, extending the Bostock case, which extended Title VII workplace protections to cover gays and lesbians from being fired from their jobs simply because of their sexuality, as well as the Bostock decision expanded Title VII coverage for transgender people. So transgender people now, thanks to Bostock, have every legal right as the rest of us, which I view as a good thing.
So, going off that, how has today's queer activist movement changed since the new edition of the TQIA plus alphabet soup compared to the original gay rights movement? And let's have both of you answer. That's okay.
Well, when we look at the history of the trans QIA movement and the LGBT, a lot of the roots historically are from experiments with children, and like John Money and Volkmar Sijic, which are German sexologists who would coin the term cisgender, which you guys might know about, and try to separate the terms sex and gender, so it becomes this conflated confusion with words and semantics. A lot of those roots actually were very pedophilic in nature, and I definitely urge everyone to go onto gaysagainstgroomers.com in our radar articles. Our radar team is amazing. They're a bunch of writers, and we have all of our sources. And yeah, you can really look into the historical accuracy of all of that. And I don't think that a lot of people who really push these narratives understand the history of where it came from, and it's a very dangerous history. And you know, they're quoting these studies that are anecdotal, soft science, and they're using children as kind of like a shield for their own radical ideologies.
Yeah, and I think it's important as a threshold to the conversation to understand definitions. And that's the tricky part when you're talking about this stuff, because it doesn't make any sense, it's irrational, it's illogical, and if you ask 10 different people to define it, you're going to get 10 different or 10 variations of an answer. You know, Christianity, by way of example, has 200 different denominations just in the United States, with thousands of more all over the world. I mean, getting a room full of Christians to agree on what the Bible says or what it means, good luck with that. I'm not comparing Christianity to transgender. I'm not doing that at all. I'm simply saying, as an analogy, that there's a lot of subjectivity within the transgender world in defining terms. So I'm going to give you the definition of terms that I think we are all operating off of. I mentioned briefly the history of the gay rights movement. I attended the 1993 March on Washington. It was a gay rights march in D.C. I lived there at the time. I was a closeted young Army officer working at the Pentagon, living in D.C. And there was this huge crowd, I don't know how many, bunches of people from all over the world, gay men and lesbians and a bunch of others. And I spent the weekend at that festival with my friends. And there was a podium with speeches, and one of the persons who gave a speech was Martina Navratilova. And I remember her giving a speech about the importance of coming out and just living your life with dignity and say, here's the thing. Here's who I am. Keep your chin up and move on with your life and be positive. And that was the takeaway from that event. And at that event in 1993, there wasn't a single sign saying anything about non-binary. There wasn't a single sign saying anything about pronouns or about transgender children, because those were things that did not exist back then. So much of what we mean when we say transgender today are words that have been created recently, or definitions of existing words that have been redefined, or some combination thereof. So you have things like cisgender and things like sex assigned at birth, things like gender-affirming healthcare, and other activist sound bites that are more rhetorical than they are evidence or fact-based. So when we're talking about how the TQ issue and the TQ problem more bluntly has come to exist, and why we're here talking about this evening, it's because after the gay rights movement succeeded, the infrastructure of that movement that had been built by gay and lesbian people over a period of decades in creating organizations like the Human Rights Campaign and Georgia Equality, etc., that infrastructure was taken over by this group of activists. They've always been present in the movement. There's always been that voice, but there was always enough adults in the room to kind of stay focused. We had missions and tasks. We needed to get things done in the courts and in Congress. And so we stayed focused and maintained enough discipline to accomplish the tasks at hand. Now that the adults have kind of left because we won the movement, there was no reason to keep being activists. We went home to turn our activist swords into plowshares and enjoy our newfound dignity. And these folks took over, and they've started making up things to do. And along the way, they've invented a whole lot of new genders and a whole lot of new sexualities and a whole lot of new pronouns. Surely you've heard. And now they are routinely and incessantly proselytizing this stuff to children at the youngest ages, preschool, kindergarten, elementary age, public school, private school. It is all over Georgia. Surely you know. And other states as well. I'm working with groups right now in Connecticut and Illinois by way of example. So this is a national thing, and the definitions that we are dealing with when we say transgender, what does that mean? Well, that's where you can get 10 different definitions, because a non-binary person that says they don't have any sex, or maybe they are both sexes, or maybe they change back and forth from time to time, and they sincerely say this is true, and they say these things happen, and this is what they are teaching to your children. You know, these words are a whole bunch of make-believe to some extent. So I'm talking too long, but I want to make a point. There are three conditions that I think legitimately define a transgender for purposes of being, for purposes of the rest of us caring. If someone wants to be demisexual or pansexual or genderqueer or non-binary, I don't know what any of that stuff means. I don't care. You be you. Knock yourself out. Why should anybody care? But when they're making up these fake concepts and teaching it to kids and pushing it as though it's something that is fact-based, reality-based, science-based, when it's not, that's the problem. But the three conditions that are reality-based, you know, transgender is three three different categories I put it in. Not me, the people who I read and follow, the smart guys who study this. There are children, some tiny number of children, mostly little boys, who are born and can develop what they call gender dysphoria, or sometimes called gender identity disorder, that can turn into a condition called transsexualism. It's defined in the DSM-5, the Manual of Mental Disorders. It's the mental health condition, a psychiatric condition. Jazz Jennings is a TV reality show person that some of you may be familiar with over a period now of many years. Has had a TV show documenting Jazz's transition from a little boy into a transgender woman and having surgeries, et cetera, et cetera. That's an example of the first population. The second population is also defined in the DSM-5, the Manual of Mental Disorders, as transvestic fetishism. Transvestic disorder is transvesticism. And this is a much larger population of males who derive some kind of sexual pleasure or erotic desire to be a woman, and when they present as a woman or they're treated as a woman, I mean, it manifests differently with different people. This gives them a sexual charge to some extent, a little bit or a whole lot. And it's like any psychiatric condition, it affects different people differently. And some people manage well enough and live their lives, and other people it just becomes all-consuming. And that second part, where it becomes all-consuming, I fear accounts for too much of the loud voices we hear from the transgender activists in person and online. So there's that second population, and these people with the transvestic fetishism, a larger group, about 2.8% of U.S. adult males have this, according to a Swedish study, of adult males, according to a Swedish study. And the first condition of the gender dysphoria, less than 0.014% of adult males have it. So the gender dysphoria, the transsexualism, is a much smaller group, according to the DSM-5. The transvestic disorder, according to a Swedish study, is a much, much larger group, overwhelmingly male. There are females in both of these populations, but a smaller amount. So we've got two groups: the kids, gender dysphoric kids; the adults, the transvestic disorder, who often transition mid or late life. Think of Caitlyn Jenner, who transitioned as about a 60-year-old. And prior to that, Bruce Jenner was not known for being effeminate or whatnot in his life. And then the third category that's important for this conversation is what is often called rapid onset gender dysphoria. And this is a more recent phenomenon, just within the age of social media, where we've seen a skyrocketing peak in kids who are saying, I have gender dysphoria. And most of those kids had no prior symptoms of it. They were not boys as little girls, but as teenage girls, largely we believe, or researchers believe, through online social contagion or through peer contagion, much like anorexia happened in the 90s, especially among groups of young females, teenage girls, and young women. It's hitting them very hard. And so they are identifying as transgender. So you have these three different populations that really are three different groups. And when the activists say transgender, they're just mushing all these groups together into one thing, like it's just one thing, but it's not. It's not. So, transgender is really just a umbrella term, and I refer to it as a fake, essentially, to describe a whole lot of different things. And these three conditions, the rapid onset gender dysphoria, the transvestic disorder, and the gender dysphoria, those are the three primary categories that actually have a diagnosis associated with it to try to make sense of it.
Thank you for the education. I think most people don't know the difference, that these are actually mental health disorders that can be defined by the DSM-5, that can be broken down. So it's good for us to be educated, everyone in society be educated on this. So let's go back to the children. And this is actually a question for Ellie. And you can answer it too, but we'll have Ellie take the mic. What is grooming as defined by Gays Against Groomers?
Well, grooming is when a adult makes the child trust them, where an adult has the ability to isolate a child in a situation where they can talk to them about inappropriate things, and have them trust their trusted adult over their parents, over their family. And we're seeing that a lot with teachers, unfortunately, these days. And grooming, obviously, it can be in a physical space, taking a child and apart from their parents, of course, but it's also ideological. Any time where they can introduce inappropriate material to a child through books or other media in schools, and introducing these different genders to a child that otherwise wouldn't know. So it's basically when an adult makes themselves trustworthy in the eyes of a child to be able to introduce them to this inappropriate material, gender ideology.
And I would just accentuate the ideological part of Ellie's explanation, that grooming as a device to normalize certain behaviors to children, to small children. So if they're exposed to them young, as they grow up, they're like, well, so what? So we see, for example, this proliferation of children's books containing graphic sexual content. I mean, graphic sexual content. A teacher in Cobb County was fired for, fifth grade teacher, I think, for reading some of that stuff to her school, and has been in the news recently. And Cobb County School Board and City of Marietta schools as well have identified books that are sexually inappropriate for young kids. And to not to put too fine a point on it, but if you watch the news, you know what I'm talking about. There's content about anal sex, oral sex, strap-on dildos, etc., etc. And we're saying that's not appropriate content for children. Who in their right minds thinks this is appropriate content for children? And nobody is banning a book. Shut up. Nobody's banning a book. We're saying you're not going to show porn books to kids. All right? That's what we're doing. There are age contents for content, and parents have to be involved in that decision.
Amen. Okay. Something else to add?
That as well, it's not just adults in a position of authority using that against kids, but it's not even just in schools. You can go over to your local Barnes and Noble and find these books that are grooming your kids, like one Target, right? A book that I just saw, my brother saw the other day, called The Gay BCs, which is for infants and toddlers, in the first words section of Barnes and Noble. A is for asexual, B is for bisexual. This is real. You go Barnes and Noble, go see it. It is insane. Infants and toddlers, in that section, talking about learning consent, how to say yes, teaching your kids a say yes policy. It's really quite alarming.
Would all agree to that. So going off that, so we talked about what grooming is and what that scenario would look like between an adult and a child, whatever the situation is. What are the intentions of the transgender community? I'm just going to lump these two questions together because they both are asking the same thing different ways. What are the intentions of the transgender community? What kind of world do they envision for the children? And why do trans activists, drag queens, and their allies seek out children? We talked about Drag Queen Story Hour, drag queen family-friendly entertainment that you see all over social media, transgender books at Target, and queer theory-based books in schools. So that's kind of a loaded question, but the intentions of the transgender community, what kind of world do they envision for kids, and why do they seek out children?
Okay. Well, there's a meme flying around about why do drag queens want to read books to children, but they don't read books to sick people in hospitals or to the elderly or shut in? Why do they only focus on children? Back in the 90s and 2000s, drag queens were not proselytizing to kids. Not that I ever heard of. This is something relatively new. So what's going on? They're fun. They're funny. I mean, who hasn't dressed in drag? It's great fun. But if you go to a drag show, you know very quickly that drag shows are, by definition, adult entertainment. They're great fun. Go to Lips if it's still open on Buford Highway. But you don't take children there. You don't take children there. Basically, the foundation of, I call it transgenderism, this ideology. And I distinguish between trans people and trans activists, because trans people, many of whom I've known and worked with over the decades, I believe just want to live their lives. I've had plenty of trans clients, time and again. We just want to live our lives in peace, free from mistreatment of anyone. And of course they do. In dignity and respect, of course they do. And I support that. We all should. It's called being a good human being. But the activist class has decided that they really need to just compel on society through cultural force, through government force, through legal force, using the apparatus of the former gay rights movement that they have hijacked, that, in hindsight, we put together a pretty powerful machine there, the gay movement. And then we left it unattended by adults, and it has turned into one of those Megan characters, the Megan movie, similar, where the activists are being so aggressive in terms of trying to educate kids, because you can mold kids' minds. Kids are impressionable. And so they're saying that kids can choose their gender, kids can choose their sex at any age. And there's no data it's just all a makeup. It's a belief system. It's not evidence-based. It's not science-based. There has been ideological capture amongst many of the medical associations in the United States, but that is starting to weaken because of what is happening across the country, as well as what has been happening in Europe, where people are revisiting this whole notion with children. They say that the only way to deal with a child who expresses gender or sex confusion is to affirm the child. They call it affirmation only, gender affirming care, where the therapists are trained and taught that when a kid comes in of any age that says, a little boy, that I feel like a girl, or I want to be a girl, that you say, yes, you're a girl. You affirm them, you tell them they're courageous and brave, and you build them up and encourage them. And then oftentimes, and you've heard this, the therapist will say to the parents of that child, the parents who's trying to figure out what's going on, they love their kids, they're trying to do the best they can. And the therapist will say something like, you want a live daughter or a dead son? Or some similar emotional blackmail, which is complete crap. There's not a shred of evidence that suicides amongst gender nonconforming kids are rare, blessedly, thank God. There's not a shred of evidence that transitioning a child, there's no evidence, reliable evidence, that reduces suicidality. These transitions are experimental, they're off-label. None of these medications that are used, from puberty blockers to cross-sex hormones, they are not approved by the FDA for use in treatment of any psychiatric conditions. Puberty blockers were developed for precocious puberty and some prostate issues completely unrelated to so-called trans kids, have nothing to do with trans kids in terms of developing this medication. And now they're being used off-label. They're not approved by the FDA. The pharmaceutical companies who sell these things and make money off of these things have never requested FDA approval. They've been using them for this purpose for decades. They've never once asked for FDA approval. Why? Well, obviously, they don't have the evidence to show that they're safe and effective long-term, because that evidence doesn't exist for any age group. I know trans people, people who have transitioned, some of them younger, some of them older, and they've transitioned in different ways. Some of them have had the full surgeries, including the bottom surgery, others in different way. And I know people, good, decent, wonderful people who live great lives. There's no pejorative in having any of this. It's not like, oh, you're less a person, or you're less virtuous, or you're bad, or you're icky because I'm gay, because I'm a homosexual. Well, we went through this. We got over it. Okay, learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. You can think whatever you want about gay people. You can think whatever you want about same-sex marriage. I don't care. I'm going to be respectful to you, and I'm hopeful you'll be respectful to me. And if you're not, then we might have a different conversation. But, we survive. We live this way. And the problem is that the transgender piece has not learned to love themselves with their condition. There are many based transsexual people who are speaking out, saying, look, we know you can't change your sex. The reason no doctor has ever got a Nobel Prize for a sex change surgery is it's never happened. No one has ever had a successful sex change surgery because you can't change your sex. I mean, that's not possible. The doctor who invented lobotomies, that doctor got a Nobel Prize. Tens of thousands of lobotomies happened in the United States by doctors who believed they were helping their patients despite the absence of any reliable evidence that they were. We're in the same category here. The opioid pain management clinic epidemic, where you had these pain management shops open on the corners of cities all over the country, pushed by Big Pharma to make money off these pills, and we're still paying a carnage society-wide for opioid addiction today. It was driven by money.
Talking about that, that's also a prelude into John Money as well. A lot of people these days, these activists, like I said, they're trying to say that it was a successful experiment, John Money's experiment on the Reimer twins, and a victim of this, his name was David Reimer, and he was raised as a girl because of John Money, because of a botched procedure at birth, and told his parents to raise him as a girl, and plot twist, he figured out he was not a girl, and it really hurt him, and he ended up killing himself later in his life because of that. But many of these trans activists like to go around and say, oh, John Money, his experiment was a success, when it really wasn't. So I don't think a lot of people know that. Like I said, I definitely encourage you guys to go check that out on the radar. But yeah, so also on the question you're talking about, like, personally, I don't know what these trans activists like envision for the future. My tinfoil hat could shine on some possible outcomes, but I don't know what their end goal is. But we are seeing a lot of real world consequences with detransitioners coming out. A lot of these poor kids that are basically being experimented on with these experimental drugs and procedures would otherwise grow up to just be healthy gay, lesbian, or straight people.
In fact, there are 11 different studies of gender nonconforming kids taken over a 40-year period by different people, and all 11 studies found overwhelmingly that if you leave these kids alone, they will desist through puberty and they will grow through their sex body dysphoria. Overwhelmingly, a very large percentage will come out on the other side of puberty and their sex bodies comfortable with it, mostly identify as gay men or lesbians. So this effort to transition children early based on the affirmation-only model that the trans activists push, in a real sense, they are transing the gay away to an extent, because most of these kids, according to the data we have, if left alone, most of them will grow up probably lesbian or gay.
So y'all basically answered the next question about the American Medical Association, like why they had jumped on board with this idea of gender affirming care. So you basically answered all that already. And the main question behind that next question was, what do you think is really at play behind this shift in our society towards normalizing it? And you kind of hit it nail on the head with the some people just have not learned to love themselves as they are born, and so there's, I'm sure Jordan Peterson would say it's not really knowing, not really looking internally and trying to have some kind of process or spiritual guidance, or not trying to seek out truth, like whatever it is. But I think you hit the nail on the head with that question. So that leads me to our last one before we open the floor for audience questions. So the Senate Bill 88, which y'all have, we should actually post the testimonials of Skylar Akins and Jeff Cleghorn. They went into the Senate. Was that this week? And Ellie too. Yeah, sorry, I didn't see yours. So all three of them, Skylar, Ellie, and Jeff, all got up in front of the Senate and did their testimonials to push for Senate Bill 88, and that was just last week, correct? 2 weeks ago? Last week, yeah. And it passed with, what was the number? It was 6-3? 6-3. Okay, so that means now it goes to the Rules Committee, correct? So there's obviously a process by which a bill goes through to eventually get signed into law. And so it went through the Senate. Now it's headed to the House, the Rules Committee. And from there, they send it to, I should know this by now, they send it to the full Senate. Yeah. Okay, so the last question, what does Senate Bill 88 propose to be signed into law? And why, surprisingly, did we have some Republican opposition?
Well, it's essentially, SB 88 is essentially a child protection and parents' rights law. They're being introduced and passed in states all over the country. And it boils down to, if any of this gender stuff is starting to happen in the child's school, the parents have to be notified. If a child indicates some gender confusion or starts wanting to change pronouns, the parents have to be notified. You see stories, especially from California, I think Washington State, Canada, and elsewhere. Democrats, unfortunately, are pretty aggressively pushing laws that will take children away from their parents if the parents don't affirm their trans identities, or if the parent believes, as I believe, that there is no such thing as a transgender child, because transgender is an ideology, and children with psychiatric conditions are not ideologies. But this bill is basically to provide for that. It's private school, public school, so there's different features for both. Public schools have elected Board of Educations. There's transparency laws. There's meetings, and parents are involved or can be involved. So there are safeguards through the elective democratic process there for public schools that do not exist in private schools. And the corruption of the gender queer ideology is especially acute in the Atlanta area private schools. So this bill is largely about addressing that problem. But the parents don't have the due process that they have through the public school option of elected school boards, et cetera. And the National Accrediting Agency for Private Schools nationally, the NAIS, and I forget what that stands for, but they mandate and push and require all this rainbow, unicorn, drag queen pedagogy for kids. And so the private schools are under a lot of pressure to satisfy their requirements. And these Ivy League schools, where the schools like Westminster and Lubbock are prepping Ivy schools, Ivy kids, I mean, that's how they like to market themselves. And, plenty of them do go on to Ivy Leagues, and these Ivy League schools are doing this and teaching this gender ideology. So the school administrators are kind of part of that, dare I call it, a corrupt system that corrupts overused, but a system that is a little smelly right now. So parents in private schools have been having problems, and yeah, these are mostly affluent people. They can pay their kids to another school, sure, but it's in all the private schools in Atlanta except for a couple of them. I mean, it's really just everywhere, so there's not a lot of options. And if you've got a kid who's been in private school for their whole career, I mean, these private school kids, I'm a public school kid, but private school kids, you know, they start and go through the same school and graduate oftentimes with the same group of kids. So pulling a kid out can be, you know, really traumatic there. So that's what this bill is intended to do at the 10,000-foot level. And the opposition by Republicans is largely from the frontline group, which I understand is the conservative Christians, and then there's another Baptist group. And there's a little bit of turf war stuff going on, but fundamentally, they don't like the idea of the government telling private schools what to do, period. You know, kind of a libertarian argument. But this applies only to schools that are taking state of Georgia funds, taxpayer funds. So if you want to take taxpayer funds, here are the rules. And again, what this does for the private schools, it says the parents have to know before you teach your kids this stuff or expose them to it, and the parents have the option to raise their hand and say no.
Okay, so now let's open the floor to the audience to ask questions. I just want to remind you, please keep it to 2 to 3 sentences, and remember to actually ask the question. No soliloquies or debates, please. Okay, so what do we have? All right, David.
Yep. Yep. I agree. It is ideological capture. Again, these are all labeled experimental. There's no longitudinal empirical data showing that trans medicine is safe and effective. There are anecdotal examples of it working well, of course, and there are increasingly number of anecdotal examples where it has not worked out well. So to your question, what to do, there are growing voices of doctors, and they always have been there, but as I listen to podcasts and people involved in this, they're just shut out. The ruling elites that run these medical organizations are, you know, they are influenced. There's peer pressure, there's financial pressure, there's professional pressure. You know, you've heard stories of people getting canceled and people getting doxxed and people getting harassed. I mean, J.K. Rowling, for crying out loud, has gotten countless death threats, rape threats. Margaret Atwood, the same thing for daring to cross and say the wrong thing about, you know, maybe women do need single-sex only spaces for women and girls for certain things, like prisons, because maybe putting men in prisons and then those men, some of them getting the female prisoners pregnant, isn't such a really good idea. And yes, this is happening. So the pushback, the meanness, the ugliness creates these pressures on some of these leaders of these groups to conform, I guess. But look to Europe. Look to Europe. Lots of things have been happening in Europe in recent years. Look to Europe. Start in the United Kingdom, the Tavistock, they have a nationalized healthcare system. They had a single public gender identity clinic in the UK that's called Tavistock. It was recently closed down, held unfit for purpose after a detailed investigation. The BBC has done some good investigative reporting on it. And basically, they decided that this affirmation-only pipeline, that just bringing in these kids and the thousands and thousands of percent increase in kids getting on these medicines and getting these surgeries, girls as young as 13 or 12 years old in the United States have had these top surgeries, breast amputations. And so they stopped this in the UK. They put a pause, and they're re-examining. And so the call that is being made to these American medical associations, the Pediatric Association, et cetera, is to just put a pause and do a systemic review of the evidence, an evidence-based review, the way they did in the UK, the way they've done in Sweden and Norway and Finland, and they've also stopped affirmative-only care for kids in those countries. Denmark and France are relooking this as well. So when you look at the evidence, let's see what's there. Just the professionals using the scientific model that we developed through the Enlightenment to figure out how to derive the best answers for civilized people. Let's use that model instead of a make-believe ideology that's just a bunch of made-up malarkey.
Yeah, speaking on Europe, the Green Party, Germany's Green Party, advocated for the abolition of the German Criminal Act, which criminalized sex with adolescents under the age of 14 in the 1970s. And like I said, a lot of these sexologists came out of Germany in the time, like 60s and 70s. A lot of those people, the activists say today, are, the fathers of gender ideology, and they look to those studies. And like I said, like you said, a lot of them are anecdotal and just not true. And now we have kids on Lupron, which, a puberty blocker that has been historically used for castrating criminals. So, and we're giving that to kids, which is obviously not good. So there is something, obviously a motivation behind it, financial motivation. We just need to focus on education, educating people on the history of these things, really, and trying to implore that, like, we should not have a physical solution for a mental problem,
Anyone else like to ask? Yes, Scotty over there. Speak nice and loud, Scotty. That's a good question. He asked, and this kind of goes back to the question about what's the intentions of the transgender community, possibly. And he asked about, is the basically intention to normalize pedophilia?
Well, listen, the gay movement has constantly, from the beginning, had to fight back against claims that we were grooming kids and pedophiles and sexual predators. That's always been there. There are reasons why that's always been there. As we know, what has happened in the Catholic Church, male priests sexually abusing young males in the Catholic Church, what's happened in the Boy Scouts, males sexually abusing young males in the Boy Scouts. Nothing about that is good. But pretending that it didn't happen is not good either. And so child safeguarding is always important. The data is overwhelming that the vast majority of pedophile acts are opposite sex, men and little girls. The vast majority of men are heterosexuals as well. Queer theory is the theory upon which transgenderism is based. And if you look at any of the queer theorists, whether it's Judith Butler and Gail Rubin, who are professors who are still teaching today, I think, or whether it's Michel Foucault, who is a dead French philosopher from the 50s and 60s, who advocating queering the norms, that to say that gender and sex are different things as opposed to synonyms, and to say that gender and sex and sexuality can mean whatever someone says they mean, and that our existing understandings of sex and sexuality are based on past thinking, old-fashioned thinking that was developed by, you got it, white, heterosexual, Christian, European men. And because these guys came up with the definition of male and female, and because these guys came up with what it means to be masculine or feminine, and because these guys decided that, you know, the nuclear family with a husband and wife relationship was the ideal model to flourish in society, because it happened by this group of people, it's all just bad. We need to erase it and redefine it all. Queer the norms. Gender, sex, and sexuality can mean whatever it means. There are groups who call for treating pedophilia just as an alternate sexual orientation. There are groups who say don't call it pedophilia. Soften the edges, call it minor attracted persons. Groups present tense within the queer TQ part of that. Pedophiles, these creepy, gross people, consider themselves part of the alphabet. They've got their own flag. Okay? So, saying that a child can consent to change their sex is not too many steps removed from claiming that a child can consent to have sex. And on that point, the ACLU argues in court that Lupron, the puberty-blocking drug given to little kids who would grow up to be gay if you leave them alone, the ACLU argues in court that that drug should not be used to chemically castrate sex offenders because it's cruel and unusual to give that drug to adult sex offenders. But the ACLU says that drug should be given to kids off-label for a psychiatric condition. And there's a Supreme Court precedent, the Roper case from 2005-2007, that held unconstitutional the death penalty for minors. The Supreme Court of the United States has said if you're under 18 years old, you lack the capacity, your brain's still forming, you lack judgment, you're still forming your identities, you're not held to the same level of legal culpability for what you did as if you had committed that same crime as an adult. So the Supreme Court says that under 18 is not sophisticated, mature enough to know what they're doing, basically, when they're committing an awful crime. But the TQ people say that under 18 is perfectly sophisticated enough to make a permanent life-altering change by taking these medications or doing these surgeries. If it made sense, it wouldn't be queer.
All right, we have time for, sorry, 8:40. Let's just do one more question, okay? Yes. And what's your name? Chris. All right, Chris. I'll let Jeff answer first. Did y'all hear the question? Yeah. Who are the lobbyists in the, are you talking about in the transgender gay community? Yes, that are fighting against what they're saying, basically. Okay. Yeah.
Well, listen, the Trevor Project, the Human Rights Campaign, Georgia Equality, GLAAD, GLAAD, Lambda Legal, the ACLU, the usual cast of characters who used to be gay rights group are now transgender groups. So now we have a new gay rights movement that has started. The log cabin Republicans remain true to their principles, and the Georgia chapter especially is now reinvigorated and doing some really good public education work and policy and political advocacy work. I hope that continues. It's so important. Gays Against Groomers are now in 23 states and growing, and in Georgia, we're taking new members. If you're interested, talk to Ellie. But we are up against the infrastructure of the former gay rights movement, which is now the transgender, queer, LGBT movement. They do not care about gay men and lesbian women. They do not represent us. We don't believe this nonsense. It is not true. It is not true that sex and gender and sexuality or whatever anybody says they mean. If you want to believe it, good for you. But stop pushing your beliefs on us. We don't go to your church, and leave our kids alone. Leave other people's children alone.
Well, that concludes our meeting for tonight. I think this was a wonderful, very important discussion to have. I just want to thank Jeff and Ellie for being here tonight, imparting your knowledge, your wisdom on all of us, just so we can continue to build our coalitions and help fight the good fight. And thank you always to Park Bench for being such a generous host. Please, y'all, buy some drinks, leave a big tip. Thank you to Park Bench. And if y'all wouldn't mind going over to our banner over there, we're going to do a picture with the board, with our executive board. All right, and thank y'all so much for coming out. This is great turnout. We appreciate your presence here. All right.